Hello again, friends, and welcome into another edition of Wrestling with Rusty right here on YouTube and Facebook for March 14th, 2026. Welcome in. This is the third time I've tried to record this video, but that's not your problem. Um, Check out my video earlier today on WCW and WWF legend Mr. Curtis Hughes um, lying to my friend Charles Stevenson, who wrestles as the Freight Train. It's up here on this channel. But this video is a little bit more positive. Um, if I had one more day with Koloff, Kernodle, and Jacobs, being Ivan Koloff, Don Kernodle, and Abe Jacobs, I met those guys in different stages of my life. And they weren't just pro wrestlers, they became friends. I've mentioned them all here on the channel many times in the past, but I was thinking about them today for some reason. I guess because I'm going through a lot of physical and emotional stuff in my own personal life. No, I'm not going to commit suicide or anything. I'm just having a lot of troubles, and life's pretty rough right now. So please say a prayer for me. But when life gets rough, I think about all the friends I lost, and when you um, think about it, three of my pro wrestling friends, and you can see Abe Jacobs there in the background in the white T-shirt on my wall there, right next to a trophy that I've got sitting on a curio cabinet. You can't see it too clear because it's way in the background. But Google Abe Jacobs, Don Kernodle, and Ivan Koloff. If you don't know who they are, you'll see three wonderful men. I'd like to take you through what I knew about them and how I met them, um, one at a time. Um, let's start with Don Kernodle. Don Kernodle passed away in May of 2021 due to suicide, but I met Don Kernodle in the 1970s at Jim Crockett's NWA Mid-Atlantic Pro Wrestling shows in Charlotte, North Carolina. I met him through a ring rat we called Sandy Brown. That was her name at the time. She had been married several times after that, so I'm not sure what her name is now or if she's even still alive. But I met I met Jackie Crockett and Don Kernodle, both through Sandy Brown, or my cousin Karen Gardner introduced me to Jackie Crockett, and then Sandy Brown introduced me to Don Kernodle, I think somewhere in there. I'm not sure, but the point is, I met Don Kernodle, and Don and I became friends. Don Kernodle was the most positive person and the nicest guy, one of the nicest guys I think you'll ever meet in the wrestling business. Because two of the other nicest guys were Abe Jacobson and Ivan Koloff. But Don Kernodle wrestled from the 70s all the way until approximately the year 2000. Don Kernodle, at the end of his life, was a Alamance County, Burlington, North Carolina deputy sheriff, doing a similar job to pro wrestling legend Johnny Weaver, who I also knew, who at the end of his life was a deputy sheriff for Mecklenburg County, Charlotte, North Carolina. But Don Kernodle worked um, after wrestling as a deputy sheriff for Alamance County, Burlington, North Carolina. And then after retiring from the sheriff department, Don Kernodle had diabetic trouble and some being overweight troubles, and a lot of other medical issues. And unfortunately, he was sad at the end of his life that I didn't even know, and apparently took his own life so he wouldn't have to go to a nursing home. I don't believe it would have came to that, but I never got the chance to try to help Don understand why he wouldn't have had to go to a nursing home. But I'm not here to get into the legalities and all of that. Don's gone, and that serves no purpose on this channel. But Don Kernodle was one of the nicest guys you'll ever want to meet, both in pro wrestling and in real life. Don Kernodle was a standout amateur wrestler at Elon College in Burlington, North Carolina, and became famous for wrestling Bob Roop, pro wrestling legend Bob Roop, to a draw on Mid-Atlantic Wrestling Television in the 70s, which led to Ole and Gene Anderson of the Minnesota Wrecking Crew training Don Kernodle in the 70s to become a pro wrestler. And Don wrestled until the 2000s and ended his pro wrestling career on the independent circuit, working with me and others in a Burlington, North Carolina wrestling promotion called the Carolina Wrestling Federation that was not owned by Don Kernodle. It was owned by a guy named Jeff Rudd, who never made it big in wrestling. But Don was just a super nice guy. I miss him terribly. And if God could come down and say, Rusty, you got one more day with somebody dead, who would it be? I'd have to choose three. I imagine God would only give me one wish, but I would say three, and that would be Don Kernodle, Abe Jacobs, and Ivan Koloff. Because many of you don't realize that in pro wrestling, just like in life, even though you see these people on television, pro wrestling is not a business that everybody can get into. And even if you get into it, some people don't stay in it because it's very cutthroat and backstabbing and just not a good business to be in. But Don Kernodle, Abe Jacobs, and Ivan Koloff were all examples of good people in a very bad industry. And I was proud to know all of them. Moving on to Ivan Koloff. Ivan Koloff had a Hall of Fame career and is now in the WWF Hall of Fame, in part for being WWF World Champion in the 1971 after beating Bruno Sammartino for the WWF Championship. And let me go back to Don Kernodle for a minute. Don came to fame in Jim Crockett Promotions for tag teaming with Sergeant Slaughter and winning the NWA World Tag Team titles with both Slaughter and I think 2 times with Nikita Koloff and Ivan Koloff. But Don was a great guy, and so was Ivan. And but Ivan probably will never get the accolades that he deserves because he wasn't in the WWF or WWF when WWF made his expansion. He was down south with Jim Crockett Promotions, and because WWF won the war against Crockett Promotions and everybody else, I think Ivan Koloff gets slighted sometimes. But Ivan was a super nice man. I met Ivan not through wrestling originally. I met Ivan when he was serving a suspension for driving drunk long before he got saved. I met him at Albemarle Road Recreation Center in Charlotte, North Carolina, where he was doing community service. After coming back from pro wrestling legend Tully Blanchard's wedding, Ivan was stopped for drinking and driving. And later on in life, Ivan became saved and died a true man of Christ. But if you don't know Ivan Koloff, the wrestler, look him up on YouTube. But Ivan Koloff, the human being, to know him was pure joy. He was the nicest guy. He always called me up and thanked me for DVDs that I sent him. about his matches that I collected over the years and different things. And Ivan was just a special, special human being. Um, Moving on to Abe Jacobs. Most of you won't know who Abe Jacobs was, but if you don't know who Abe Jacobs was, look him up on YouTube. If you don't know who Ivan Koloff was, look him up on YouTube. And if you don't know who Don Kernodle was, look him up on YouTube. All three are shining examples of the pro wrestling business, and the heart of their career was not in the WWF. It was in the NWA territory days, which is why all three might not get their accolades, because the NWA did not win the wrestling war, or WCW did not win the wrestling war, but WWF did. But all three were shining examples and great pro wrestlers. And now for this video, I got to get on to Abe Jacobs. Abe Jacobs wrestled through the 50s and through the 80s. I think may have started his amateur career even in the 40s, maybe. I'm not sure about that, but Abe Jacobs was an amateur wrestler as well as a professional wrestler. I first met Abe also at Jim Crockett Promotions, NWA, and going back in the dressing rooms with people like Jackie Crockett, meeting many people, not just Abe Jacobs. But that's how I first met Abe Jacobs. And then later on, I saw him at Ricky Steamboat's Mid-Atlantic Gym in Charlotte, North Carolina, years later, and rekindled a friendship with Abe after not seeing Abe for quite some time, because uh, when Abe left different times at Crockett Promotions to go travel around the world and wrestle in other territories. And sometimes he wasn't even in the United States. But Abe Jacobs was a pro wrestling legend, just like Ivan Koloff and Don Kernodle. But Abe Jacobs, too, was just as nice as Ivan and Don. Um, he never met a stranger. And Abe Jacobs, Don Kernodle, and Ivan Koloff were examples of good men in real life and examples of good men in a very bad industry of pro wrestling. And I was lucky to know them. So if God came down and said, you got one wish for one more day with somebody in pro wrestling, I couldn't choose one. I'd have to say three: Ivan Koloff, Abe Jacobs, and Don Kernodle. And like I said, look all three of them up on YouTube. They were great wrestlers, but even more, they were greater human beings. And I was proud that God let all three of them gentlemen cross my path, not only in pro wrestling, but in real life as well. Because like I said, with Ivan, I didn't meet him through wrestling. I never went in the bad guy dressing room. But I met Ivan later in life after his main wrestling career was over. But I met Don Kernodle and Abe Jacobs through wrestling. But no matter how I met them, all three of those individuals were special human beings for the wrestling industry, and even greater human beings for humanity. And I miss them daily and dearly. And that's why I wanted to put this video out, even though there's videos on this channel about all three of them. I wanted to put another one out grouping all three of them together as some sort of tribute, even though Don Kernodle died in 2021, Ivan Koloff died in 2017, and Abe Jacobs died in 2024. Um, Even though their death happened years ago, um, in different time frames, they're still on my mind and in my heart. And if I'm lucky enough to make it to heaven one day, I know that I'll see Ivan Koloff, Abe Jacobs, and Don Kernodle. Abe Jacobs was the real name of Abe Jacobs. Don Kernodle was the real name of Don Kernodle. And Ivan Koloff's real name was Oral, O-R-E-A-L, Oral Peris, P-E-R-R-I-S. This is just my tribute to Abe Jacobs, Ivan Koloff, and Don Kernodle. And I wish I had one more day with all three. That's going to do it for me, Rusty. I'm out of here. We'll see you next time for another edition of Wrestling with Rusty right here on YouTube. And until we meet again, my friends, please look up on YouTube Ivan Koloff, Abe Jacobs, and Don Kernodle. Three great wrestlers, but three better men in real life. I love you, Ivan. I love you, Don. And I love you, Abe. And I miss you all every day of my life. But you made my life better more than you ever will know or understand. You made me a better person. You made me a better wrestling fan. And you made me be grateful for friends like you. That's going to do it for me, friends. This is Rusty. I'm out of here. We'll see you next time for another edition of Wrestling with Rusty right on YouTube and Facebook. And until we meet again, my friends, as the voice of AEW, Ian Riccaboni would say, happy wrestling, everybody, and thank you for watching.